All right, let's talk about flowers. Because when there's no talk of plants, you can get away from talking about flowers and flower structures and how they reproduce. We're going to talk about vascularity, seeds, pollens. Importantly here, forget the vascularity of the seeds. We're going to talk about pollen grains and flowers, and a little bit about fruit, but not much. Talk about the reproductive process of vascular plants. Talk about seeds and pollen grains and flowers and stuff again. Talk about the parts of the flower. You guys remember that from a long time ago. And then that's that. There are 3 types of flowering plants: annuals, biennials, perennials. Today I'm going to tell you how to shop for plants when you go out to Lowe's. Because some plants are an absolute waste of money in my mind. Most plants are an absolute waste of money in my mind. To me, a plant needs to do work, and the work it needs to do is give me food. My wife disagrees, and she loves these, annuals. Annuals are what people might call instant color. They provide color for a year, tops. They sprout from a seed, produce a flower, and produce seeds all in one season, and then they die. They live for 1 year, thus they're called annual. Biennials are a bit better than them. They rank a little bit higher on my scale of useful plants. Biennials are going to be good for that first year they grow vegetatively. The second year they produce seeds. And then that year they die. So you got 2 years on that plant. A little bit more value for your money there. But my favorite plants are the perennials. They take a little while to start. You got 1 or 2 years of growth. And then after that, they produce seeds every year for years and years and years. So if you want a long-term investment, you go with your perennials. Last year, I was so proud of myself. I bought a bunch of perennials. I bought apple trees. I got pear apple trees. I've got peach trees. I've got pawpaw trees. If you've never heard of the pawpaw, Virginia native fruit, kind of nice. And about 15-ish fig trees, because I can't get enough figs ever. These trees are going to grow for a few years and then produce fruit every year thereafter. Every year they're going to make flowers after they're sexually mature. Those are the perennials. They just keep coming back. That being said, plants do have lifespans. They do die eventually, just like you will. Oh, and sorry, surprise, you're going to die. Spoilers, you're going to die someday. Don't worry, that's the whole last lecture of the class is you're going to die. The point of this, the whole point of all of annuals, perennials, and biennials is to reproduce. That's the name of the game of life, reproduction. You reproduce, you win. It's so weird. People are like, what's the meaning of life? Well, it's to reproduce, biology-wise. I guess there's other philosophical things, but reproduction, that's the name of the game. We talked about the alternation of generations. This gave plants a major advantage over other organisms in colonizing the land. It allows plants to be one of the first organisms to dominate an area that's just opened up. Animals don't do it well. Insects don't even do it as well as plants. The flowers, and the angiosperms are flowering plants, as you recall. These flowers are very specialized reproductive organs. They allow for this alternation of generations to happen and for fertilization to occur to produce very specialized organisms. This is an image from my garden, actually. Thank you. It's called Italian kaleidoscope. Don't get me wrong, I didn't breed that one. I bought it. But yeah, it was really worth it. Flowers are stems that produce reproductive organs instead of leaves. You've all looked at flowers before. Somebody may have given you flowers. You may have just destroyed them because, you know, that's the way you roll. All flowers are going to have what's known as a sepal underneath. These sepals are there to protect the developing flower. It's this sort of greenish leaves that surrounds the flower. You may think of them as the exterior of a bud before a flower is burst. Once that sepal opens up, you'll see the petals. The petals are specialized leaves that are there to attract pollinators. Like bees, yeah. You'll notice that they're not going toward any, I don't know, cones. These flowers all have special parts. I'm going to see if I can draw a picture for you. The male component of the flower are called stamens. And the stamen is composed of the anther and the filament. A little better one, yeah. So what we're looking at is a big, long filament. And at the end of that filament, you're going to have the anther. Now, what word have we heard of dealing with plants that looks a lot like anther? It's the male reproductive part. What's it called? I'll give you a hint. One was the archegonium. That's the female. The male was the antheridium. It's still coming from that same Greek root andros. So here we have this long piece is the filament. That short piece is the anther. The anther is where you're going to be producing pollen. Pollen grains, once they land, turn into 2 sperm cells each. This is the male component of the plant, the stamen. The female component of the plant is known as the pistil. So here's the stamen, and then stamen, and this structure here is the pistil, this large female component. The pistil is made up of carpels, and you guys don't really know what a carpel is. Effectively, the pistil holds the female gametophyte, the archegonium. It produces the eggs. Eggs live down here. They live in the component known as the ovary, the ovule. Then you're going to have this really long piece coming off the ovule. It's a long hollow tube that's called the style. And at the very tip of the style, you have the stigma, which has a little bit of sticky water at the top. So you got the stamen, which is the male part. Then you've got the pistil, which is the female part. And the pistil is composed of the ovule, the style, and the stigma. The stigma receives the pollen. Pollen comes in, sticks to the stigma because of that little bit of water on it, water droplet. The pollen then releases 2 sperm, and those sperm swim down the style, and they fertilize the egg in the ovule. Some flowers are called perfect flowers. They're perfect because they have both male and female parts. How would you get, this is, I guess, for Nicole specifically, how would you get pollen from the male part to the female part? Bees, right? Pollinators. You could also have wind, or you can do it yourself. Birds. Really, it's all about just moving from one place to another. Pollen's super sticky. Sticks to everything. Heck, you've probably gone out one day and your car is covered in like yellow. It's rough to get off. You have to hose it down. You just never take it off, let it build up. It's a nice protective covering. But plants don't necessarily need to reproduce sexually. They can reproduce asexually in 3 ways: vegetative reproduction, somatic embryogenesis, or apomixis. Before I go into these, any questions about the flower? Okay. First method, vegetative reproduction. Here you're going to build a new plant based off of a non-reproductive part of that plant. That is, you're going to take a piece of the plant and grow a whole new plant from it. You do this using cuttings. You've probably seen this happen before. Heck, for those of you trying to grow plants in water, you may have just taken a cutting off a plant and put it in water to see if you can get roots to grow from it. That's vegetative reproduction. Bamboo is notorious for vegetative reproduction. If you take a shoot of bamboo, you cut the bamboo, you put it in the ground, it will grow a whole new plant through vegetative reproduction. Shoot, what was it? Do you guys remember The Martian? It was a movie. It was also a book. What did he survive off of? Potatoes. How? He cut the potatoes up and then grew a whole new potato plant from each piece, non-reproductive portion of that potato. That's vegetative. Let's say strawberries. How do strawberries reproduce? You could use seeds. There's seeds on the outside of the strawberry. But they shoot out these little runners that go from one place to the next. If you take those runners and put them in the ground, they grow roots, and now you have a whole new plant. That's vegetative. It's not using the reproductive part of the flower. You might undergo a term you've probably never heard of, somatic embryogenesis. Here, embryos, so diploid organisms, are created from individual body cells. That is, the leaves might produce seeds. We're not talking about spores or anything like that. Literal seeds from non-reproductive parts. It's not sexual reproduction. These seeds are being formed from the diploid body cells. And then the last one is apomixis, because we're right back to dandelions, because they just bother me. Dandelions don't need another plant to mate with. Dandelions, because they are horrible, horrible plants, okay, they are supremely well adapted to their environment, will in fact grow and produce seeds without another organism. The way they do that is the flowers are produced by diploid eggs. In the flower, you get diploid eggs. So you have meiosis occurs, but you don't get that having to happen. So you still get crossing over. That leads to fertilized eggs being created by one plant without the need of any sperm. It's like the virgin birth of plants. But it happens all the time. So these plants, through apomixis, which is you're getting meiosis 1 occurs, but meiosis 2 doesn't. You get a fully diploid organism with a new genetic crossing over to be produced from one plant.
So do weeds do it? Like, do all weeds do that?
No, just certain ones do. Certain plants do this. And again, we're back to human terms, right? There's weeds and there's flowers. Well, what's a weed? A weed is just a flower that we don't like. Anything could be a weed, depending on our terms. And I will say, so I make fun of dandelions a lot, but dandelions actually do serve a purpose. Dandelions are healthy if you want to eat them. Pete, you sell them at Wegmans? Yeah. Dandelions in earlier colonial times, this is how you could avoid scurvy, by eating dandelions. People make salads out of their leaves. So some people, dandelions aren't weeds. To me, I don't like them. I hate the taproot. It just offends me. So vegetative reproduction, somatic embryogenesis, and apomixis are ways that plants can reproduce without sex. I do want to point this out, and I do want to be explicitly clear about it, because this happens when I ask questions on the exam. I want you to know plants do reproduce sexually. Absolutely. Whenever an egg and a sperm come together, that's sexual reproduction. So pollen fertilizing an egg is sexual reproduction. Does that make sense? You don't have to have intercourse for sexual reproduction to occur. That's just a human thing. Does that make sense? I say that because I'm sure I'm going to ask some sort of question about how do plants reproduce sexually without, how do plants reproduce without sex? Apomixis, somatic embryogenesis, and vegetative reproduction. I always, 80% of the class all the time tells me through alternation of generations, or by moving pollen from one place to another. Please bear with me on this when I tell you that is plant sex. So anytime you're going to get a sperm and an egg fertilizing each other, that's sexual reproduction. Do you see that? I just want to be very clear so that you don't make that mistake. It's not as big on my list as mitochondria or brown eyes, blue eyes, but it's still on my list. If you don't know what that means, good. All right, any questions?